What's going on, guys? So today's video is going to be all about harm prevention. Essentially, how can we reduce or mitigate the potential negative health effects of performance enhancing drug use. You know, obviously, as we all know, it's not exactly a taboo subject within our sport anymore, and with recent events going on and looking at, you know, some of these top level athletes that have been passing, it seems just as important as it's always been. But I think it's now accentuating the fact to the younger generations of people looking into the sport and trying to move their way through it, that health is the most important factor, right? If we don't have that, then, you know, what's the point? I know some people who, you know, have that attitude of, man, I don't care, fuck it, if it kills me, it kills me, I'd rather die at 40 and be mad, and all that shit. But until they're actually faced with a situation where the wooden box actually is just in front of them, it's all talk. You know, I've seen people that have been put into situations like that, that have that opinion that, you know, death doesn't scare them, or, you know, it is what it is, they're going to live their life. But until the hospital bed is there and it's now become a reality, they're soon quite quick to change their mind. But nevertheless, harm prevention. What can we do now that essentially helps to prevent, not necessarily stop, but prevent as much as possible of the negative health implications later on in life? Because ultimately, with performance enhancing drugs, there are some things that are going to cause acute damage, granted, but in a generalised sense, these things accumulate over time. The damage done to your liver, kidney, brain, heart, etc. is something that happens over time, and you get to sort of like your 40s, 50s, and then you have cardiac problems. You know, you start to exhibit signs of deteriorations of the brain, things like Alzheimer's setting in, your liver's packed up, your kidneys are packed up. So it's important that we, as people accepting and understanding the risks involved, do everything we can to essentially try and steer clear of all that shit in as blunt of terms as possible. So without further ado, what can we do? So the first thing that comes to mind is obviously the most simple and the most obvious: blood work, right? So we need to look under the hood. We need to see how your heart's functioning, your liver health, your kidney health, and in some instances it may be worth taking a deeper dive into your thyroid health and pancreas health. Now, it's important to note that blood work is literally just a snapshot in time. That one moment when you took that blood test or you had the blood test done, that is what is shown in blood work panels, right? It's not a general overview of your health in the time that you were on cycle. It is just that one snapshot, right? But it can give you a good clear indication, say if you're at peak androgen exposure or at the height of your duration of exposure. It could be a useful tool to see how your body copes with the stress of high loads of androgens, things like peaks and troughs, and, you know, picking when you do your blood work. But as we know, right, so blood work is just a snapshot in time, okay? Now, what else is there, right? The medical services that we have available to us now in this day and age are ridiculous. You know, we can get tests done for literally anything and everything nowadays, right? So, an echocardiogram, right? But not just the usual sticky pads on where they measure the electronic pulses in your heart. I'm talking a proper ECG, a real echocardiogram, where they measure left ventricular diameter, right? And they do a 3D scan of the heart. And what this will do is give you, again, a snapshot in time of your heart's, like I said, the left ventricular diameter, so the space in between the two walls of the left ventricle of the heart. And what this allows you to do is you can put that there and say, this was 6 months ago, or this was a year ago. In a year's time, I'm going to get it done again. And what I can do with this 2 bits of information is compare the LV, the left ventricular growth, from here to here. And you can see whether there has been any substantial change in the ventricular diameter of your heart. Okay, a good clear indication of cardiac hypertrophy, so the growth of the heart, which is obviously, if you understand androgens, how they work, and the RAS, well, the renin, angiotensin and aldosterone system is a very big, clear problem that arises with performance enhancing drug use, specifically anabolic and androgenic steroids, things like growth hormone as well. And you know, again, this is what, you know, cardiac hypertrophy is a leading cause of cardiac arrest and cardiac issues later on in life. That also allows you to work out whether the risk reward is worth it to you as a genetic individual, because every single human being, again, we always talk about the inter-individuality between any single person, right? Every single person is going to have their own genetic makeup. We'll come on to genetics in a moment. But every single person is going to have their own genetic makeup, which means they're going to have their own genetic code, which means they could potentially have increased probability of having cardiac risks, right, as they get older in life. If they have the genetic expression for it, they might have a higher probability of cancer cell growth if the genetic expression lies within their code and their makeup. So it's important that we track these things, and you can see the growth, like I said, in the left ventricular from A to B, and you can work out whether the amount you're using that has given you X amount of growth is worth it, thinking, well, this was 1 year, what about 5, 10, 20 years time? Okay, it allows you to actually see whether the risk reward profile is actually worth it. Now, when it comes to blood work, I'm going to refer back to blood work here, because on the heart side of things, everyone always talks about cholesterol status. Now, in a generalized sense, it doesn't tell us a great deal. You could have very poor cholesterol by the average, you know, mean of what they suggest is a healthy range of good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. But you could also at that time have really bad level of calcification within the blood vessels, right? And what all that means is level of plaque buildup within your blood vessels. Now, plaque buildup would in turn, if it gets too much, could potentially lead to a blockage further on down the line, whether it's a complete blockage of an artery or vessel, or a partial blockage. Now, how would we work that out, or how would we look into that? Now, a calcium score test will give you a good indication of a rough idea, but again, these things can all be taken way further, right? You can go right in depth with it and spend a hell of a lot of money getting this, even more in-depth checks done, right? But looking at cholesterol status is not enough on blood work. A calcium score test would give you a better representation of your heart health, in combination, of course, with the proper echocardiogram, so that you can actually check the heart thoroughly from all angles. Not just, oh, my cholesterol's all right, so my heart's probably okay. Okay, because in reality, it doesn't tell enough of a picture, or any picture, in all honesty. So that leads me now onto genetic testing. Now, this is quite new. It's quite a new thing we've got nowadays. You've got sites like 23andMe. The validity of them is questionable. So, you know, there are some you know, organizations and websites and stuff that you can use that aren't very valid, or you probably think is a load of shit. But if you look around and find the right one, like I said, 23andMe have given back some quite good reputable results. I am actually in the process of, you know, just about to get mine done again, and I'll explain why. Again, I kind of touched on it when we spoke about the echocardiogram and the heart situation. Now, every single individual has their own genetic expressions, right? Their own genetic code. And within that code will be the code for cardiac risk, right? If it runs in your family. If you've got 3 people above you in your family from generation to generation that have all had heart attacks, there's a good chance that you've got the genetic expression within your makeup to potentially have one later on in life. It doesn't mean you're going to, because obviously there is many external factors that go into every single situation, right? It's never ever black and white. It is always grey, and sometimes it's bloody purple. So what else can genetic testing tell you? It can tell you whether you have expressions for possible cancer growth, your brain health, whether there's going to be any expression for potential Alzheimer's, dementia later on in life, brain deterioration in a general sense, the state of your thyroid function. You can learn a hell of a lot from genetic coding and genetic tests. But what do you do with that information once you've got it? Well, let's say, again, we'll use the heart for example. Let's say that you have within your family cardiomyopathy or an enlarged heart, so cardiac hypertrophy, the growth of the heart that runs in your family, right? And you want to use PEDs and enhancements. So you know that this is a potential risk. And if you look at the risk reward and say, well, I've also kind of got potential here to take bodybuilding further, and maybe some reputable people have told me that I could take it very far and be very good genetically, structurally. But I also have this underlying that could potentially make itself present with the use of performance enhancing drugs, things that are going to speed up this process. Right, so what can you then do to prevent that? Right, we know that a cardiomyopathy or cardiac hypertrophy is a thing that could run through your family because of the genetic code. What do we do? Right, so let's make sure we get routinely every 6 months ECGs done. Let's measure the left ventricular growth and track it over time, right? So we know that if from here to here, here to here, it grows X amount, you can then weigh up physically whether in 10 years time it's going to be feasible for you to carry on using the specific androgen load you use. You can go into much more detail with that, and you can look at specific dosaging, what amount of total anabolics does what to your to the growth over time, and you can experiment with it to find a risk reward profile within your stack design that's then not going to exhibit as bigger risk later on and cause as much growth. Or you can ultimately avoid certain substances that could potentially cause problems like that, or look to use adequate supplementation, things like telmisartan, very good angiotensin 2 blocker, receptor blocker, to help control and mediate that potential risk. Okay, that's just one example there, but you can see how understanding your genes will allow you to then apply that knowledge and allow you to check more in depth for things that you are going to be prone to later on in life, right? So there's more to harm prevention than just getting your blood work done every 12 weeks, okay? There's a lot more to it than that. And if you think, okay, there is a lot of information being put out there now, guys, by people that understand this sort of stuff. And it's important that you know, there's no one governing this. There's no one governing what you are taking. There's no regulated health checks. Your health really does lie in your own hands. Okay, and if you've got the money to spend on test, growth, insulin, all the food you're eating, then you sure as hell can afford to put some money aside to get these tests done. There are great companies out there now, people like the Blood Lab, Chris at the Blood Lab, who is making things like this accessible to bodybuilders specifically, with a better understanding to us, you know, not just general public, but to specifically bodybuilders. You know, he's got an understanding that we are going to be using things that are going to potentiate these risks and these hazards. So there is a clear and easy way to get this stuff done, right? There isn't really any excuses anymore. And if you don't, and you do run into problems later on in life, then it really is your own fault.